Morning, I'm Jamie. So what I'm going to do is take you through the process of how to bake a sourdough loaf. Very few ingredients needed, just flour, water and salt. So that's it really. From the flour, water and salt, you're going to get a sourdough starter, and then the sourdough starter you're then going to use to make your sourdough loaf. But it will all become clear on the video. Hope you enjoy it. Hope it makes sense. And if you do make one, send me a picture. Let me see what it looks like at the end. Okay, good luck. Okay, so for the purposes of this video where I'm going to show you how to bake a sourdough loaf of bread, I'm going to assume that you've already got your sourdough starter in place. This is my sourdough starter. It's that's about a month old, I suppose. I'm not really going to show you right now how to create this. I'm going to assume that you've already got your sourdough starter. If you haven't, very easy to find. Just look it up on the internet, how to create sourdough starter. In essence, it's 50% flour, 50% water, mix together and leave it. And then every single day, you pour a bit of it away and you reintroduce 50% flour, 50% water, about 50 grams each. Mix it, leave it, next day, pour it away, leave a little bit left, again, add a little bit of flour, water, mix, and do that for 6 days or so. And what will happen is you'll start to see that it starts to ferment. So it'll get bubbles in, it'll start to rise up the side of the glass. After about 6-7 days, it'll be fully active and it'll be ready to use. So I use this elastic band on the outside of my jar. So I place it there once I've added the flour and water, so I know when it's actually risen and when it's active. So that's your sourdough starter. Okay, so at this stage, you've already fed your starter dough. You can see here that it's already started to rise. This is where it started. So this is a fed starter dough, and this is what you should start with. For my sourdough, I use a combination of wholemeal flour, spelt flour, and white flour. So with white, I have 200 grams and then 100 grams of each of the other types. But really, if you want to use 400 of white, that's fine. So just use whatever you've got. Obviously, it just gives a different flavour combination in terms of the end result. But yeah, 400 grams. So when you're adding the salt, there's a few different ways that you can do it. First of all, you can add it straight into the flour mixture, which is what I'm going to do in a second. Make sure it's well mixed, or alternatively, you can dissolve it in the water. If you do that, then you've got a better chance of it distributing amongst the dough. But I've tried all different ways, and actually it kind of works. You will hear a lot of people say, don't put the salt on top of the yeast because it'll kill the yeast, but really when you're mixing it like this, it's not going to have that effect. So I'm just going to add 10 grams of salt into this dough. So 10 grams. Okay, good for flavour, so don't miss out the salt. So a little bit of a schoolboy error earlier because I thought I was recording and I wasn't. Not that I'm blaming Apple products at all. That's user error, I think you call it. So what I did is I measured out 230 millilitres of water, so just lukewarm water. And then the starter dough, which you saw earlier, I actually poured into the water and mixed it up. And that obviously meant then that when I added it to the dough, it had an opportunity to really get mixed up quite well. So that was the water, it was the sourdough starter. So it was 230 millilitres, as I said, of the water. And in terms of the starter, it's 160 grams that you need to use for this recipe. What else? The salt, it was 10 grams. So I then just took the water and the sourdough mixture, poured it into the dry ingredients, gave it a quick mix until it was just incorporated, and then left it. So what we're doing here is we're just allowing the dough to what we call autolyze. So it's basically, in layman's terms, just absorbing the water and the sourdough starter. It's allowing the cell structure of the gluten to break down. So it's breaking down all the protein strands within the dough. It's allowing the gluten to develop. And it's basically doing what would normally happen through the kneading process, but hey, we don't need to knead it if we don't need to. So we let it stand for a while, let that process continue, and I would say leave it for about half an hour to autolyze, and then you do what we call the lift and turn or lift and fold process. We'll do that a few times, and I'll show you what that looks like next. Okay, so now is the time to do the first lift and turn. So this is where you're going to continue to develop the gluten here. So you can see here, so basically you want to take the corner, lift, fold, turn around, again same, lift, fold, again, lift, fold, lift, fold. So done that 4 times in that turn. We'll leave that again for about another half an hour, and then we'll come back and we'll do the same again. Okay, so it's now had another 30 minutes, and you can see dough still there nicely, and second lift and turn. So again, scoop up right underneath, lift and fold, lift. I don't know if you can see, but it's actually a lot stretchier than it was before. And fold. That's the gluten starting to develop within that dough. So lift and fold. And once you start doing this, you'll be able to tell yourselves the actual feel of the dough. It's softer, it's more silky. So that's telling you that it's working. So there you go. That's another 4. So leave it for another half an hour and we'll come back. It's now rested for another 30 minutes. And again, I'm gonna start to lift. So stretch it as you're doing it. And fold. Quarter turn of the bowl. Lift. Try and stretch it as you're doing it. Fold. Again. Stretch. Fold. I don't know whether you can see, but the texture of the dough is changing. It's kind of springing back a little bit more, so you can see that the gluten is actually starting to develop in there, starting to become nice and springy. So again, final turn, lift and fold. Okay, so that's that. So we're going to do one more of those after this, and then we're going to shape it and we're going to leave it to rest to start to develop that flavour that's going to be all important when we cook it. So it's now had 4 turns, and as you can see, the dough is a lot stretchier, and if you pull it up, what you'll start to see now is it's very thin. You can see the light behind there, so this is the window pane effect. So you'll start to see that as you pull it and stretch it, the gluten has developed, and yeah, it's actually really silky, smooth. And when you do the window pane effect, try and do it from the middle. You can see the stretchiness there. So I don't know whether you can see, but I can see the light coming in through behind this. So that tells me that the gluten has developed to the point I want it to. So the dough's really told me that it's ready. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to shape it, and I'm going to leave it to rest. So the thing is, when you are working with, dough and making bread, you're really going to have to get used to it being messy. Okay, so if you don't like having flour and dough everywhere, then probably isn't for you. But there you go. So this, if you'd actually gone through the process of kneading the dough, you know, developing those muscles, working it for 10, 20 minutes, whatever, then this is the state that you'd get at. But actually, as you saw, we've just done a turn process. We've just lifted, stretched, turned, we've left it. It's taken a longer time, but we've got the same result. So now all I want to do is I'm going to put it back in the bowl. But before I do that, I'm going to shape it slightly. So I'm just going to make sure that the dough is kind of workable. Yeah, so you're going to fold it turn it, fold it, turn it. Okay. We're going to do a proper shaping later before we actually cook it for its final stage, but there we go. Just like a little bowl like that. Plonk it back in the bowl. And then leave that really to kind of double in size, grow, develop. The flavours will start to develop in there. And yeah, we'll come back to it when that's happened. Now you notice I've been using this to cover the dough after every turn. So those of you that travel quite a lot, well, used to travel quite a lot, I guess, you'll notice these are handy shower caps. Now, I don't really have a need for a shower cap to cover my non-existent hair. So whenever I go to a hotel, I pick these up because they're good for covering stuff like this. So if you've got some, that's what you can use. Otherwise, just use a wet tea towel or a damp tea towel. Okay, so this next bit is really just a little bit of preparation. So what you will need, well, I actually use a Pyrex dish. So a Pyrex dish with a lid, just like this. And this really is what I'm going to be proving the dough in for the next stage. But I'm also going to be using it to cook in. It's going to act as a Dutch oven. So this is what you need, or something similar. If you've got a big casserole pot or something like that, then you can use that as well. So yeah, so that's the first one. You're also going to need a tea towel. So not one of those terry toweling fluffy tea towels, but something which is fluff free and easy to clean. This is going to get very dusty with flour. It's also going to be something that's going to contain the dough when it's rising in the next rise. So what you're going to need to do here is, I use a sieve and some white flour. You don't need to use a sieve. I just think it's easier to get the thing covered. So I will basically get a good covering of flour, because otherwise what's going to happen is the wet dough will stick to the tea towel. And I've had one or two interesting episodes where I've had to pick dough off, which, believe me, isn't fun. So you're going to do this, and then you're going to basically place this with the flour facing upwards inside the Dutch oven, which we looked at earlier. Okay, so here we are. So it's inside the casserole dish. Just make sure really that all the creases and such have got flour in it. If you worry about having too much flour on the loaf at the end, don't worry, because you can actually dust it off at the next stage or once it's risen, so don't worry too much about that. But you just really want to make sure that the dough's not going to stick to this when you put it in it. Okay, so back to our dough. Let's have a look. So this is the risen dough, and as you can see, it's kind of quite nicely more than doubled in size. Very soft. Okay, lovely, shiny, soft looking dough. What I'm going to need to do now is tip this out onto a floured surface so I can start to shape it, ready to go into the Dutch oven. Now this is probably one of the most important parts that you're going to really need to focus on. So first of all, let me just show you, can you see the bubbles and the in there? So as I pull that away, you can see the strands there. So that tells me that it's fully risen, it's well risen, that the gluten has developed well. It's nice sticky dough, so it's going to be, it's quite a moist dough, and actually it can be quite difficult to work with, but this is going to be where the folding and the shaping is going to be important. So get all your dough out, you don't want to waste any of it. Okay, so there we go, there's the dough. Handy scraper, a couple of quid. You can pick one of these up, really helps you shape and get the dough off. Again, as I said before, you're going to have flour everywhere, but you know, you're just going to have to live with it. So a bit more flour on my hands. So I'm going to flatten it out a little bit. Now watch the way that I shape this. So basically I'm going to fold over the dough, okay? Then, okay, so the dough is folded into the middle, folded into the middle, folded over, and then on the opposite side, folded into the middle, folded into the middle, folded over, so it meets in the center, and then fold that over and crimp the edges. So you crimp the edges, so you're really creating a tight seal here. Now, if you don't do this, what's going to happen is your loaf isn't going to rise properly in the oven, and it's probably going to split. So you want a really good tight seal on this. And then the next bit really is you're going to pull it towards yourself. Pull it. And what you're doing here is creating tension across the top of the dough and creating a ball. So just do this a few times. You create that tension, turn it, create the tension, turn it, tension, turn, tension, turn. Okay, see now that lovely shape. So we'll get our Dutch oven back. And what I'm going to do is place that so the top faces down. Okay, so like this, and then roll over so the top faces down. Okay, so again, what we're going to do now is use a little bit more flour and make sure that the sides are covered, because again, as this rises up to the inside of the towel, what you don't want is for it to stick, okay, because that's going to make it absolutely impossible to get out. And again, as I said, this has happened to me a few times, so learn by my mistakes. So you go, nicely covered. And then all we're doing now is folding this over, giving it a nice little home to live in for probably, I would say, you know, the next 3.5 hours or so at room temperature. Or what you can actually do is leave that in the fridge overnight to slowly rise. And that's it, ready. Right, so it's now been probably about 3.5 hours since we put this bad boy in the Dutch oven or the casserole dish. So let's see how things are progressing. Okay, so as you can see, yeah, absolutely risen. Great. So that's kind of what we're looking for. So what we want to do now is tip this out. So what we do is we put this lid on, we turn it upside down, we remove the tea towel from the top, and then we're ready to score. The towel, and as I said before, you know, if there's too much flour, you can give it a bit of a brush off. Told you, if you're worried about flour being on your work surface, not for you. There you go. And actually, if you wanted those, you know, those round concentric circles that you've seen on a lot of sourdough, what you need is a banneton. But mine is back in Manchester and I'm in Geneva, so I don't have one of those right now. So I'm just going to brush that off. And now we're ready to score. So what you want to get is a nice sharp bread knife. If you're doing it traditionally, you have something called a lame, and that is basically a piece of wood with a razor blade in it. But that's what bakers use. We don't. Home bakers, we're going to use a bread knife. So be confident when you're doing the scoring, because when you make the lines, the scores in the bread, what that's going to do is it allow it to have what we call oven spring in the oven when it goes into the oven, and allows it to expand. If you don't score it properly, you're not going to have that really nice risen loaf, because it's going to be really constrained and maintained within the bread itself. So let's have a look. So let's go 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that you go. So once we've done this, we put the lid back on, like so. And now it's ready to go into the oven. At 230 degrees centigrade, and it's going to stay in there with the lid on for 25 minutes. And once it's had 25 minutes at that temperature, we take the lid off and we cook it for another 25 minutes. So let's give it some time to cook, bake. Now it's time to take her out of the oven. And here's the finished loaf.
Line, yes. Or do you sort of like change from the circle to district?
No. Well, all the trains are different, so I only drive the Piccadilly line.
You only, okay, Piccadilly line. Oh, line. You get lots of the other carrots, get some hearty mix and get some in whatever you need.
Yes,
And here we go, the final loaf. So I've given it time to cool down. Actually, it is still a little warm, but let's cut into it and see what we've got. So I'm just going to cut in and see. Nice warm loaf. And here you go. So you've got lovely aerated, lots of little holes. There you go. So that is going to be lovely, toasted for sandwiches. And believe me, during lockdown, we've been having probably the same sandwiches for the last, what seems like 345 weeks. But there you go. So that's how you make a homemade sourdough loaf. Now, I'm not a professional baker. I'm a home baker. That is my way of making sourdough loaf in less than 24 hours. If you want to take longer, you can. You can store it in the fridge. You can cook it days after. But quite frankly, if you want a piece of bread, if you want a piece of toast with your coffee in the morning, that is the way to do it. Enjoy!